Welcome to Four Quarter Lives, a podcast exploring the profound impact of longer lives and careers on everything: countries, companies, couples, and careers. I'm Avivah Wittenberg-Cox, and on this week's Four Quarter Lives, I talk with Rob Nathan. Rob's a career counselor and occupational psychologist who spent decades helping people navigate the big professional transitions: reinvention, stuckness, self-doubt, workplace politics, and those moments when the old story no longer fits. He's also the editor and driving force behind a new book for practitioners, The Holistic Career Coaching Handbook, which brings together approaches that look not just at decisions, but at identity, energy, and what makes change possible. What makes Rob especially interesting for this series is that he's also a four-quarter role model in real time. About to turn 77, he's not winding down so much as widening out, developing new projects in Southeast Asia, working with younger talent, and deliberately putting himself in novel, uncomfortable situations that keep his energy and perspective alive. In this conversation, we explore why so many people remain trapped in the old education, work, retirement script, what it takes to unstick a life or a career, and how organizations could normalize career conversations across 5 generations. So, Rob Nathan, welcome to Four Quarter Lives. Delighted to have you with us.
Thank you, Avivah. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, I was delighted to receive your book, which I thought was much needed in this terrain, and we'll be talking about it throughout this interview, but the Holistic Career Coaching Handbook I've just read with great pleasure. And pick up on one of the things that you're saying is basically something I think many of my listeners are going to recognize is this old 3-stage pattern of life: education, work, retirement, that we all are working on trying to rewire. Tell us first, why is the script so stubborn? Why are companies so attached to it when we know and they know about these longer, ever-stretching 100-year lives?
Well, I think knowing about it is one thing. Doing something about it is quite different. And these systems attached to education, work, and retirement were created a long time ago. They haven't really caught up with the reality of the fact that people are living longer lives and wanting to work for longer. So the system actually doesn't support that. Also, individuals, I think, as a response to that established system, get stuck in that system, and it's really hard to extricate yourself from it. So maybe people get caught up financially, they get caught up in terms of having a social network, therefore they don't take into consideration their need for a social connection outside of the workplace. So everything gets focused on society provided by the employer. I think that maybe if we look at younger people and smaller organizations that are more agile, more fluid, or maybe people who've been able to maintain a sense of their own autonomy and have a side hustle, not necessarily so attached to those old models, maybe those individuals are more able to adapt and survive. Not necessarily because they think I'm going to live to be 100, but simply because they don't want to be taken over and subsumed by their employer. So I think there are reasons kind of on both sides why that old paradigm persists in an unhealthy way for many people.
So it's a kind of dual dance. Nobody's really responsible. We're all intertwined in these old patterns and have to rethink them.
I think we're responsible, but I think we are. You leave school and you think about what I'm going to do, and you don't necessarily know what you want to do, and you get your first job. And there's a lot of talk now about Gen Z, which is unfortunately quite a lot of it is media-driven, not actually necessarily supported by the evidence. And the reality is that people want the same kind of thing they've always wanted. Young people, when they leave school or apprenticeship or college or university, they want the earth. And they're often disappointed when they go into their first piece of work. And I think the fact that young graduates only stay maybe a year, 18 months in their first role hasn't changed very much since I was at university. I remember exactly the same talk.
Were we
50
all
years ago.
disappointed in a similar way at the time?
I think many
I
people
certainly
were.
remembered being disappointed.
Yeah, I think the first job role, you're trying to get used to a new way of being, where you're not actually being told that you have to be this lecture or that particular exam. You're on your own, and I think you may have ideals about how you'd like to change the world, and the reality is, when you experience it, it's very different.
So you don't
And
think
I
it's a
think
generational thing? You're pointing more to simply an age-related behavior set.
I think it's a generational thing in the sense that a younger person might be more willing to take the risk of moving on and is not yet embedded in a lifestyle that
Yeah.
actually prevents them from doing that, or convinces themselves they can't do that because they're bought into a mortgage, they're bought, or if they can afford a mortgage, they get bought into settling down, and they become more dependent on the employer, I think, to fulfill their needs.
Yeah. So, Rob, you're a pretty good counterexample or role model of a new way of thinking about one's life, I would suggest. Give us an arc. I understand it's your birthday today, so we can all communally wish you a happy birthday, and you're nudging into what I call your fourth quarter. Give me a bit of your own arc of life and where you're sitting now and what your plans for this next phase
Plans. I
are.
don't know about plans, but
You've got lots of plans.
I have ideas. I have ideas. The arc of life. Well, I mean, when I left university, I was pretty clear about the kind of things that I wanted to do. So I have quite a clear vision. I wanted to work in occupational psychology. I wanted to do what was called counseling then, but now is called coaching.
Yeah.
And everything that I did around studying taught me that I was, fortunate eventually to find the right sort of thing. And I guess that I've had over the years a kind of what I call planned happenstance approach to my life and my working life, which is about having some idea of what I want, but not necessarily being in love with it or rigidly sticking to it. So that when opportunities came my way, I took advantage of them. So many years ago, I was walking down the street, and in the old days, newsagents would have their sort of magazines outside their shop. And I saw this notice called Jobs Weekly. I thought that's an area I'm interested in, being a career coach. So I rang up the editor and I said, "Do you need anything written?" And he said, "Yes. Can you do an article on CVs by tomorrow?" I said, "Yeah, sure, absolutely."
Wonderful.
So I did, and that was the start of let's call it a beautiful relationship, because he ended up being the careers editor for the Times. We ended up writing a book together, my first book, and which was serialized on Pebble Mill at 1 and on TV for about 2 years.
Just because of a newsstand
Just because
article.
of
Fantastic.
a newsstand. And like a hungry person seeks restaurant signs, I was hungry, looking out for ideas hither and thither. And I guess that's kind of, I've never known the trajectory of my life, how that would go. But I guess being willing to take advantage of opportunities. Like when I started my own business, which was in 1978, goodness me, I had no idea how I was going to do this. So I went along and I went to a company called Rosetta Desborough. I'd worked there when I was 17 for some work experience.
Yeah.
As a PR agency. And I said, "Can I talk to you?" She said, "Well, you can have an hour of the whole board." And I recorded that session, and they said to me, "You need to write a book, you need to become a secretary of your professional association, you need to go on the radio and you go on television." And I said, "I can't do these things." And I did them all. I did them all. So
Fantastic.
that
That's
was
a great story.
hugely powerful, hugely influential. So those sorts of instances, a lot is around support from other people, getting energy from other people, getting ideas from other people. That's kind of where I've actually moved forward, not in terms of a predetermined arc, but actually just in terms of, well, that's a good idea. That energizes me. That looks like it's going to work. Let's go with that. And that's continued. And I think in terms of relationships, I have fortunate enough to build some very, very good relationships with not just friends, but with colleagues as well. And I get a lot of energy from those people, from those discussions. And I'm known as somebody who run away with ideas. I'm not particularly strong on detail or dotting the I's, crossing the T's, but actually I'm the one who kind of formulates ideas, and possibly they'll come to me in the middle of the night. And then the following day I'm sort of getting my phone out and voice recording all these ideas one after the other, which is great. So
Fascinating.
that's
and you still have them, since you're now bringing your organization to new geographies. And we were laughing before we started that you're picking them rather strategically as age-friendly destinations.
You were the one who suggested I pick them strategically, but maybe there is a deep-seated reason why I've chosen to develop the work of company career counselling services in Southeast Asia, because there's more respect for elders.
Very smart.
I think Singapore and places like that are definitely an aging society. That sounds like a very smart one, but I think it's kind of more ephemeral than that, more sort of more by chance. I think that I actually met someone who was a graduate of one of our training courses, who has her own amazing story, how she uplifted herself to Thailand from England with nothing to go to, took her husband and her 2 children there, and has made a life for herself there as a career coach. And is now director of Asia for our company, and I'm working with her to develop the work there.
Fantastic.
Interesting enough, we're working with young people over there at the moment, not necessarily with elders, but it's interesting kind of the hierarchical societies over there, the degree of respect that is afforded to people who are more senior and older than you in a way that's, I think, quite different from the West.
Almost the flip side, isn't it?
Almost the flip side, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about what the organization that you've now spent many decades building. You work in 2 arenas, mostly individuals contemplating developmental change and organizations that are shaping career pathways. Which side do you think is adapting faster to our new demographics, people or institutions?
Well, I was going to say possibly neither, but they're certainly not adapting in sync with one another. I think there are many examples of people who want things differently from the way they used to be, particularly since COVID, where there's been a much greater emphasis on the need for well-being, for work-life balance, for meaningful. There's always been a desire for meaningful work, but I think there's perhaps Gen Z, as is often talked about, is more likely to voice their demands and requirements for meaningful work, for fairness, for the opportunity for growth and development. So I think that has definitely been accelerated since the pandemic. And obviously with a massive rise of technology since then, there's been sort of the added facility, if you like, to be able to work from home and to be able to make things happen much more quickly. Employers, I think, as we talked earlier on, that some of them are stuck in the old paradigm where older workers are not really respected, or even though the laws about retirement have changed since 2011, they are not necessarily rewarded in the way that they could be, or valued for their acquired wisdom, their what's often called crystallized intelligence, as opposed to the more fluid intelligence ascribed to younger people. But there are examples of, we know well-known examples of companies that have adjusted their approach to suit older people. And many organizations with which we work with have set up internal systems to enable their people internally to move around more fluidly, to stop them getting stuck, if you like, in a particular occupation. So, for example, we're working at the moment with a healthcare provider that is saying, look, we want people who are clinicians to be able to move to more non-clinical roles and vice versa. They believe that by encouraging internal fluidity and mobility, they're inevitably going to save money and to make better use of their resources. So there are examples of employers who have adjusted. And as you know, Avivah, I'm reluctant to generalize because I see examples
on both sides,
all over the place of those who are not willing to move and those who are. And of course, I have worked with many employers who want to make a difference.
You're getting a self-selected group of the best.
However, I often get contacted by individual people working with those organizations who want to make a difference. Yeah. And then they find that they themselves are up against the institution that's not quite ready for the ideas that they have that they would like to implement.
Absolutely. So do I. And don't you get a sense that almost organizations are sort of going to top and tail it? They're getting rid of their older folk, but they're also waiting to get rid of their younger folk with this whole AI revolution. I mean, this whole notion of graduate recruitments and AI replacing junior jobs. Are you seeing that?
I was talking a few weeks ago with a colleague of mine who works for one of the largest law firms, which is
particularly
reputed to be law firms, accountancy firms, and so on. And he said, no, they are not having significant reductions in recruitment and employment, but they do expect their graduates to be tech savvy and AI savvy and to incorporate the use of AI into their work. So I know generally we read about quite a lot of reductions in recruitment overall. But with this particular example, they say it's not making a massive difference to their recruitment policies at the moment, which was nice to hear.
Yes, we'll keep our fingers crossed.
Our fingers crossed, yes.
You were mentioning when we were talking about career change more generally that you tend to go much more deeply into the roots of challenges because of your counseling and occupational psychology background. I'm curious about this whole notion of when people say they want change at any age. What are the most common deeper blockers under the surface that they don't necessarily even know themselves, but that you can pattern see quite clearly?
Well, it depends how you define change, of course. If change is going from what I call zero to hero, then that actually is really quite difficult.
What do you mean by zero to hero?
Well, I feel dreadful at the moment, and I want nirvana. I want paradise.
Right.
I think the notion, the deeper notion, if you like, of self-limiting beliefs, where somebody will get to the point of saying, this is what I really would love to do, but I can't do it, and I'm not good enough. I'm too old. That's a common one. I'm too young. People like me don't get that sort of role, and with my background, I'd never get that job. There's too much competition around. These are things that people often say when they get to the point of looking at the edge of the diving board up into the deep water below. I think also there is this career management theory called career inaction theory. And that's not career in action, but career inaction in the sense of paralysis, which is around having a desire to do something different or to change, if you like, but not being able to do it. Yeah. So there's a kind of paralysis. And I think there's a fear. There's a fear of putting yourself into an unfamiliar territory where you don't know how to kind of control things. You don't know what the rules are. I think there's an anxiety there about being out of control. There's a tendency to focus on the negative. And I draw on Daniel Kahneman's prospect theory here, thinking fast, thinking slow, in terms of our tendency to focus on what's going wrong rather than what's going right. There's also a tendency to focus on the short term rather than the longer term. Therefore, if I give this up now, this is what I'm going to be losing, rather than actually thinking about a longer term vision of where I might be heading. And I think there's a reluctance maybe to see the steps of change as a transition. There's a guy called William Bridges, who's a great name for someone who's written a book on transition.
Yes, it certainly is. He was lucky.
He defined transition as being the emotional, psychological process that we need to go through in order to adjust to the concrete change. So the change is you move from job A to job B, you move from country X to country Y, you get married, you get divorced, etc., etc. The transition is the psychological or emotional work we need to do in order to adjust to the concrete change. And I think people often underestimate that, or they see it as a complete change, going from the completely familiar to the completely unfamiliar. I think there are a number of factors which influence people for either making a change or not making a change. I mean, I think finances are obviously a huge one. I think support, having good emotional support around you is massive. I saw somebody recently who realized that he did not want to continue in his pretty successful career working in the automotive industry when he went for a job interview. And they said, why do you want this job? And he, well, I don't know. I don't. And he realized afterwards, I don't want this job.
Yeah, exactly.
He was we run a program called Thrive at 55.
Yep.
And he was one of our first coachees. And he decided there and then he needed to do something about this. And he was in a senior managerial role. He didn't want to commit any longer to the corporate world. And he has now become a bike fitter, working for a franchise arrangement, going around to people's houses who've bought bikes, but who don't know how to fit them. So there's an example of somebody who's been very successful for a variety of reasons. And the opposite, of course, is what makes people stay stuck and they can't make that move. Well, I talked about the kind of emotional factors, but there are also, in the same way that you have support from others, you can have the opposite. So I remember seeing a lawyer once who wanted to become a counsellor. And I actually have to say, lawyers are one of the biggest occupational groups we tend to see. And this person
there are a lot of them, and a lot of them really want to get out of that. Yeah.
And this particular person said to me, I can't become a counsellor until my mother dies.
Ah, because she wanted him to be a lawyer.
And the relationship between her and the lady and her mother was such that she just would feel such humiliation, shame, or guilt, or whatever, if she did this. So I think there are myriad reasons why people can and cannot make the shift that they might want to make. And they're complex and they sometimes go quite deep, but they can be categorized, I guess, in terms of internal blockers and external blockers.
So I love that William Bridges distinction between change and transition. I think it's really fundamental. And once you get that, it helps. Do you think, I've written about transition muscles, do you think people can get skilled at transition? Can we get better at it? And what does it take?
Yes, I think people can get tired of it, I think. But I guess it depends whether you look on it as a change. If you see, I see some people who say, I love change. I absolutely love it. And my colleague who lives in Asia thrives on a blank sheet of paper. And, in fact, she did an inspiring TED talk about her experiences as well. So I think there are some people who definitely get energy from the blank sheet of paper. And I think there are skills that we can learn if we become more self-aware about the process of transition. So if I can, and it's hard to do it when you're in it, but if I can recognize that I'm going through an emotional shift, but it's normal for me to feel scared, it's normal for me to feel anxious, it's normal for me to feel, oh gosh, I'm giving up this familiar area, then I'm not going to be so influenced by that particular feeling. It's when we're not really skilled at noticing those feelings and allowing them to exist that we start fighting against them or just working to maybe act out against those feelings as well. So that means I'm stuck. And I do see people who sort of say, I can't move, I can't do anything, But I think, I was talking to somebody the other day about someone who's made a number of changes in her career and now is saying, that's no good, I can't do that. Why? Well, possibly partly because she's 58 and the changes that she made were much earlier in her life when perhaps less was at stake. And perhaps when you reach a certain age, and it's different for different people, you start to see the stakes as higher and the potential for loss to be more significant in your life. And we see people quite often shortly before they're coming up to a birthday with a 0 in it. I'm 30, I'm really old. I'm 40, I'm in midlife. I think in France, midlife is officially 47, I think, that's right. But then there's, the big 50 and then so on and so on and so on. I think that does actually cause people...
It's true, those numbers do have such a mesmerizing effect.
They have a significant effect sometimes, yes.
Crazy, yeah. Talking about that effect and ageism in general, I want to go back to the cultural contrasts we floated a little bit earlier of traditional societies where elders are honored. In Western employment, older workers are really, the research is pretty adamant about them being seen as slower, less valuable, less open to learning, less tech-friendly, or simply in a lot of sectors, it's just time to move on after a given age. And in tech, I keep hearing these poor techies who are 30 and they think they're has-beens. What do you think, and especially now with your work moving over to Asia, what do you think sits at the root of this youthism at work?
I guess the move perhaps from post-industrial revolution society through massive technological change, society that has always privileged youth as being beautiful, as being intelligent, as being quick, as being adaptable and agile. But perhaps also there are, and I'm not really qualified to comment on this, but my view is there are wider implications in society around how we treat elders. We don't live in a society where we tend to live in small villages and communities. People are much more separated from one another. So it's each person for themselves. Whereas when we go over to places like Southeast Asia, we see that there is this endemic respect for elders in the community, and that transfers itself to the workplace as well. So I think there is, in Western society, a tendency, as you say, to kind of believe that people, once they reach a certain age, are less able to contribute. They are perhaps considered to be an impediment. They cost more, pensions in terms of health benefits. They seem to be slower. They seem to be replaceable. And yet, a massive trick is being missed in the sense that these people carry knowledge of years of experience. Very interesting experiment. Young people considered to be much quicker, but I can't remember who did it, but there was a typing test. Whilst the younger people were definitely quicker than the older ones finished first. Why did they finish first? Well, there were two reasons. One was that they kind of had the experience of they knew which letter or which word was coming next, so they could anticipate.
Yep.
The other reason was that they
made less errors, no?
Right?
I imagine.
I think yes, that's right. I think they made less errors. And we often hear about, and I mentioned this earlier on, about the fluid versus the crystallized intelligence. Yeah. Yes, younger people may be better and quicker at reasoning in areas of unfamiliarity, but older people, older workers are better at using their experience, pulling things together, recognizing patterns. And I think both can work very well together. And there's a great book, I would recommend it to your listeners, by Steve Butler called Manage the Gap. And he runs a smallish company of 150 people where he very much privileges the multi-generational teams working together. And there's one lovely thing that he does that stood out for me in his book, where he has these, I think, weekly or monthly open house meetings where anybody can come and just talk about how's your week going, how's your month going. And you don't have to come and you don't have to speak if you come, but it's a great opportunity for younger people to hear what older people are going through and vice versa. So I think the lesson from that is that we need to bring communities together to really get to know each other, to hear what the other person is going through, whether it's a different age, it's a different culture, different background, a different part of the business, part of the organization. And I think, unfortunately, we tend to be quite siloed and cut
by
off from
age
each
and
other.
stage. Yeah, no, I think that's a fabulous idea, the very informality and naturalness of opening up conversations. And I wanted, that's a nice segue to my next question, which was, you've written a chapter in the new book, which is a compendium of career advice for managers and employers at every age and stage. And you wrote a long chapter in the book on how to bring career conversations into the workplace. So this very idea. So what exactly do you mean beyond the intergenerational exchange by a career conversation? And why are so few workplaces set up to do them well? That seems a fairly natural thing for employers to organize.
You would have thought so, yes. So a career conversation, as we see it, is an opportunity for a manager or a colleague to have a conversation with a team member or another colleague about how they see their career going, how they see their development expanding in the future, if that's what they want, and what would they like for their future. One of the blockers to this is that many organizations are performance focused, and they tend to be spending their resources on performance appraisal and not having development conversations.
Yeah.
So the holistic career coaching handbook goes beyond that and says that managers need to recognize when people come to work, they bring their whole selves. They don't just turn up and be a worker, and you are ignoring the realities of the people around you, possibly ignoring strengths and skills that they bring or could bring to the workplace, ignoring perhaps what their motives are, what their values are, what their intentions are. And if you don't get to know your people, and that's, I think, behind Steve Butler's open house meetings, then you're missing a huge trick, whether they be young, whether they be middle career, middle life, or whether they be older. You are assuming that they have the characteristics perhaps aligned to their group. And the number of people who've said to me, young people these days, they're so demanding. I saw a play the other day where there was this older person, shall we say, who was going to a dance class in the community centre, and he turns up on his own, and the person who's there to actually be his dance partner is a 21-year-old young man, and they get into a conversation, as you can imagine, which was very interesting. But at one point, the older one says, "You young people, you're so emotional. Don't you ever get anything done?" So there's some kind of stereotype bias against people who may be seen to be different from you. So the more you can unpeel the layers of that potential perceived difference, the more you can say, well, actually, that person is just like anybody else. They've got needs, and I can understand where you're coming from better than I could before. Managers in organizations are a very hard-pressed bunch. They are pressurized from every which way. So I think that for organizations to have successful career conversations, I think it's paramount, because every large organization runs these annual or biennial employee satisfaction surveys. And every single time it comes up, you're not doing enough for our career development.
Yeah.
We are considering leaving. And organizations get worried about that. And they say, we don't want to lose good people. We're worried about our reputation. So they then sometimes call us in, and they say, we'd like to do something around career conversations, which is often, but not always, having our managers be better able to have these more holistic conversations with their team members.
If a CEO or a CHRO is listening and says, okay, I want to start something tomorrow that's going to move a bit the needle from this measurement mindset to more of a motivational one, what are 2 or 3 things or practices that would create a culture of where career conversations, as you define them, would be normalized?
I think having many touch points, not just having the pressure put on line managers to have conversations, having workshops, having resources, recognizing that career and general development is a shared responsibility. The individuals themselves have a responsibility. The manager has a responsibility as a coach. Probably if there is an HR or learning development function, there's a responsibility there, and there's a shared responsibility. So I think, unfortunately, many organizations in the past took responsibility for managing the careers of their employees. And then at some point, maybe after the 80s and 90s, the kind of pendulum switched, saying, no, we're not going to do this anymore. It's individuals who need to manage their own careers.
Very much.
But hey, we're not going to provide the resources to help you do that. So I think whereas many organizations have not caught up with the ones who don't provide the resources to enable people to manage their careers and develop their careers. Those that are doing better, I think, are providing good resources and good infrastructure and good support.
Let's dig a little bit deeper into intergenerational questions. You said you're working a lot with young people. You know how hungry they are for these kinds of conversations. What do you think older workers could learn from these younger workers right now? I know there's a lot of judgment going on very often, as you've said, towards Gen Z. What do younger workers need to understand about these longer careers? And do you think that message is landing? Do you think they do see the fact that they may be working for the next 6 decades or so as they start. Which is a daunting thought for most of them.
It's a daunting thought, and I don't think most people think they're going to be working for the next 6 decades. No, I don't think that. I think people perhaps think much more short-term than that. I think that those organizations that are introducing cross-mentoring, I think, is great, because there's the opportunity to learn from each other. At the obvious level, I think older people who are not necessarily so tech savvy can learn from the digital nativism of younger people, for sure. And I think, I work with young people a lot younger than me. Mind you, these days everybody is a lot younger than me. So, and I know my weaknesses, but I also think they're quite different and quite varied amongst the younger people that I work with. So let's say I work with 7 or 8 younger people. They're all different from each other. They have their own strengths, their own weaknesses, and so on. Some are more tech savvy than others, and some would, definitely wouldn't want to go near a computer if they could possibly avoid it. I think for young people from older people, I think there's something about pace here. There's something about recognizing that maybe it's the tortoise and the hare thing. Maybe there's something about recognizing the value of the tortoise, and that actually there is something to be admired or respected or appreciated about that difference in pace. And actually a lot of this is down to listening, and really listening and hearing about people's stories. And I think when you hear about people's stories, you appreciate what they've got to offer, the strengths that they bring, the values they have, what they're standing for, what they are, the traumas they might have experienced in their life, the challenges that they are being faced with on a day-to-day basis. And, then you realize that people are just like you and me.
Yeah.
And we perhaps don't look at people as younger or older, but just as different from us. And that's okay.
Yes, I think that's something the media would like us not to believe, that there are a lot more commonalities across ages and stages. This
and
kind of set up for conflict discussion is not very helpful.
Because I'm a psychologist and I see people, who we respect individual differences and don't necessarily group people as according to different ages. That being said, there is clear difference between a group of, say, 30 or 40 people under the age of 30 and a group of 30 or 40 people over the age of 60. There are clear differences.
Yeah. There are clear commonalities. So, and that's where I'm going to end with you, since I'm spending your birthday with you and delighted to wish you a very happy 77th. Can you share what you, who've seen a lot of life and many, many people working their way and navigating their way through these longer lives, what does a good fourth quarter look like for you? How would you define it for yourself? I'm not looking at aggregating here.
Yes. Well, I recently went on a trip to Costa Rica, and there were various adventurous opportunities there, like whitewater rafting and zip lining, amongst other things. And I was prevaricating in my head before I went, but I went for it, had a go, and it was amazing. And I think I mentioned to you that with the whitewater rafting trip, I had no idea what to expect, other than I'd had some rather easy whitewater rafting experience many years ago. And this was like way, way more difficult. It was a level 3, level 4 river, which was higher and faster than usual. And once you're in the river, there's no going back. You can't say, sorry, I want to get off. I was quite scared. And then there was a point at which I thought, oh, this is great. This is fantastic. Bring it on. Give me more water. And I think that's quite a profound effect on me, because amazingly enough, they produced some extraordinary photographs afterwards, because they had these little paparazzi kayaks following us down the river. And it's going to be a memory that's lived with me forever. But there's something around being open to opportunities, being open. Again, there was a group around us of people who were saying, right, they were going to do it. And so probably being egged on a bit. That's critical, I think, of having the support of others to try out new things.
Yep.
Always learning. I love mixing with people who are different from me, whether they're different in age, different in culture, different in approach, even though it's uncomfortable, I do like to be challenged and challenge myself. I love the process of writing. I write short stories. A few years ago, I did a master's in creative writing, discovered I was not a novelist. I've taken up some voluntary work recently, running shared reading groups for elders in Age UK, which I love doing because I love hearing the stories that people have got to bring. And if there's anybody out there who wants to offer me the opportunity to do some voluntary reading with younger people, I'd love to do that, because it seems there are more opportunities with elders, which is fine, but I just love to do that with younger people too. The support and challenge of other people is critical for me,
Yeah.
plus physical exercise. I do a lot of sport. I do something probably an hour of a sport or something every day. Usually gets me going in the morning. And what's critical is having, for me, the support of not just friends, but family as well. I have a very supportive wife. I've got some lovely children, 3 grandchildren. So I feel very blessed, very, very fortunate. So a little bit about kind of what life is like for a 77-year-old.
Sounds wonderful.
I don't feel I'm 77, but that's the reality. That's the reality.
That is probably the secret to your success. So writing, reading, and whitewater rafting sounds like a pretty good model. And in my Q4 definitions, my word for Q4 is called harvesting, and it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing. You're harvesting the investments, skills, and knowledge that you've built up over decades. So thank you for sharing it with us. Good luck with all your projects in Asia, and keep on jumping into the water.
Keep on jumping into the water. I will do that. Thank you, Avivah. It's been lovely talking with you. Thank you so much.
Until next time, we'll do an update.
Okay. All the best. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
What I loved about this conversation with Rob Nathan was its humanity. There's a great deal of talk today about reskilling, talent pipelines, AI disruption, and aging workforces. But Rob keeps bringing us back to the person inside the career. His distinction between external change and internal transition is especially important. We often assume that if someone can see a better future, they can simply move towards it. But careers are emotional structures as much as economic ones, and fear, guilt, habit, and identity, and other people's expectations all shape what feels possible. I was also struck by the way Rob models his own message. At 77, just into Q4, he isn't performing some heroic version of endless productivity. He's harvesting. He's writing, mentoring, volunteering, exercising, building relationships, and staying open to challenge and adventure. That seems to me like a very modern fourth quarter. Engaged, generous, curious, and alive. In a world still obsessed with youth, his life is a reminder that wisdom, pattern recognition, and openness may be among the greatest assets of all. I'm Avivah Wittenberg-Cox, and we are living our 4-quarter lives. For more thinking about the impact of our 4-quarter lives, you can read my column at Forbes and subscribe to my Elderberries newsletter on Substack. Let's design lives that aren't just longer, but better.